Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, so one of the most important purposes for me in doing this channel is to talk about personality disorders. Okay, I do talk about true crime because for me, true crime is very interesting, but almost inevitably, when we talk about a true crime case, we're looking at personality disorders, sort of in capital letters, basically. But the main purpose of my channel is to sort of take a deep dive into what are personality disorders, specifically the cluster B personality disorders. And the reason I focus on the cluster B disorders is because in my own family, we've had a lot of cluster B personality disorders, and I have been diagnosed with a cluster B personality disorder. I don't know if I'm specifically only one type. I think, after being diagnosed a few times, the doctors sort of told me I was sort of a mixture of different cluster B. I wasn't really one specific type. So, I have a little bit of, I guess, the different types of cluster B personality disorders. But obviously, one of the most important aspects of cluster B is the narcissism aspect.
NPD is the secondhand smoke of psychiatry.
I'd say narcissism is the secondhand smoke of our time. You stand close enough to it, you're going to get sick.
And in my opinion, I think narcissism is not too far away from addictions and maybe borderline and just, antisocial. It's sort of in the same neighborhood. And even if a person is not totally narcissistic, okay, just being in the neighborhood of that, just being in the neighborhood of, just the erratic, dramatic, erratic, unstable, sort of aggressive, competitive, sort of more vicious, more feral, like they say, like feral cats, feral animals, it's almost like you're in the neighborhood of being a feral person.
And you know what? In some ways, the diagnosis is irrelevant because all that's doing is saying the person's having problems because of it. But if they're lying, manipulating, exploiting, raging at you, who cares if they have a diagnosis? That's not good for you to be in the presence of.
So this is obviously an area that we really want to pay attention to, but also to have good understanding, and to make sure we don't fall into any detours where we're actually not understanding this properly.
And then it takes us back to that more critical issues. Why are people like this? Or like this because they're insecure, and that makes people feel guilty. Well, if he's insecure and this is why he's doing this, and that's what we're going to have to get to the core of.
So we've just been watching a very famous YouTube influencer, and I chose her because she's very famous. She's has a lot of influence in, I think, the internet conversation around narcissism and hopefully cluster B. So obviously I'm talking about Dr. Ramani Durvasula. Okay, Dr. Ramani Durvasula is, I believe, a retired or emeritus professor at one of the Cal State schools. And she apparently has had a psych lab where she has investigated personality disorders. So she is an authority. And I think, it's fair to say she represents, a good sample of how I think mainstream psychologists look at personality disorders. So this is very important. Okay. And I do agree with Dr. Ramani that it sort of doesn't make sense to have forgiveness for someone who has a personality disorders if we don't have a good understanding of what we're forgiving or what it means to forgive, because too easily forgiveness can cross the line into enabling. Okay, and it's just like with somebody who has an addiction. If you think you're forgiving somebody but you don't really know what you're dealing with, and you accidentally end up sort of enabling somebody who has an addiction, that's not going to help solve whatever problems you're dealing with in your relationship or in your family.
It's all about second chances that we give them. We're a little bit too heavy-handed with the forgiveness, and I'm hoping we can sort of help folks navigate those waters in a way that's healthy for them and their families.
But I do have to notice, and this is just my first impression, okay, and I haven't watched a lot of her videos because I find Dr. Ramani to be a little bit kind of angry and edgy, and I don't know if it's just me, but I'm just going to say, just the phrase, when you say heavy-handed with the forgiveness, okay, I mean, take it out of the context of NPD. But if somebody can very flippantly and very kind of glibly just sort of interpose and sort of juxtapose the idea of being heavy-handed with the forgiveness, that's a little bit, to me, that's a little bit perverse. I mean, that's almost like a perverse combination, and it sort of makes me wonder if we need to also just carefully, just, a little bit, just put it on the table that maybe Dr. Ramani may have a little, maybe she's taken this too personally, or maybe she has some her own personal issues with narcissism that might be clouding her objectivity.
When does normal self-confidence cross the line into grandiosity?
Self-confidence is a healthy state. And people who are self-confident don't need to blast their achievements from every rooftop and every social media platform. People who are truly self-confident don't need to talk over other people and their achievement. People who are self-confident don't require their achievements to be front and center and ahead of everybody else's. People who are self-confident are so confident in their sense of self and their achievements that they actually can stay quiet about it.
Okay, so from my perspective, just as a common sense observer, I think the tone that she's using, I think it shows that she's actually annoyed and even personally annoyed by narcissistic symptoms. And it's almost like she's kind of scolding somebody. Like when I've been scolded in my lifetime, people have used that tone of voice and that kind of sarcasm, and that kind of personal irritation. Okay, now I understand. Narcissistic symptoms are provocative. Okay, they can be annoying. But it's just like, the people who need to work in the zoo, you don't deserve to work around, poisonous snakes and dangerous animals if you're not sort of comfortable with wild animals, and normal people should not be working with wolves or tigers. I understand that. But if you're going to be a psychologist, okay, you have to be like the person who can work with tigers and wolves and poisonous snakes, where you're not going to take it personally, the things that would actually, that would provoke regular people. But granted, she's not totally dripping with irritation, but I think there is some evidence that she's showing that she is a little bit irritated. And if we take a look at another one of her clips, okay, where she gets a little more honest, we'll see that she really is, I think, very personally affected by narcissism. And so that raises the question to me of whether she has really a neutral place to be, pontificating about narcissism.
In my most recent experience that I just had of pseudo macro empathy, this person was criticizing me for being too hard on narcissistic people and not giving them a chance. And ironically, after the call, I reflected, my life is a damn living monument to giving narcissistic people too many chances. And my messed up health and mind are the inscription on that stupid monument.
Okay, so this is important. Now we're learning that Dr. Ramani is not just an objective scientist who's objectively telling us about narcissism. What it turns out is that she's a personal victim of narcissism, okay? And that's important, okay? Because just like if you're going to be an expert on rattlesnakes, if you're going to be an expert on bobcats, okay, it's going to make a difference if you have been personally, let's say, injured, or more accurately, if you've actually been traumatized by one of those animals. Okay, because anybody who works around rattlesnakes and bobcats, they're going to get the occasional injury. The question is, are they traumatized by it, and does it affect their attitude towards these animals? Okay, that would be important. Because a lot of people who work with, say, bobcats or work with sharks or work with rattlesnakes or, dangerous animals, if they get to a point where they've been personally traumatized to the point of resenting the animal, okay, and that could happen. I mean, let's say if I work with sharks and a shark actually amputates me, or let's say a shark injures me so bad in the wrist that I actually lose my hand, okay, that would be such a trauma to me as a scientist that it might actually contaminate my attitude towards sharks and wild animals in general. And I might actually be corrupted in a sense that I might lose some of my more basic unbiased attitudes about conservation and conservation of wildlife or something like that. You know what I'm saying? So like say if somebody is bitten by a rattlesnake, but by some accident, it actually causes them to lose their hand. They have to actually amputate their hand or whatever. That could actually really affect their attitude as a person towards wildlife conservation. Okay. And so to some extent, it's not just that Dr. Ramani is admitting that she's been traumatized by narcissists, but you can tell that she really does seem to be very resentful about it. Okay. And that resentfulness, that kind of punctuation of resentfulness really does show, I think, in her videos.
My life is a damn living monument to giving narcissistic people too many chances. And my messed up health and mind are the inscription on that stupid monument.
And also, I do have to add, okay, and I'm going to be very personal here, okay? I grew up in a family of people who had narcissistic and borderline conditions, okay? My mother, I'm going to be honest, my mother is a psychiatrist, okay? So just because you're in the mental health field, that doesn't mean you can't have these characteristics, okay? And my mother has, I'm sorry to say, but she has some borderline symptoms that can be very shocking. She can be very aggressive. She can be very emotional to the point where it's kind of scary, you know. And of course, my father, I'll admit, my father has some narcissistic characteristics. So I've grown up in these environments, and I've had relationships with people who are narcissistic. And so with the calibration of my own personal experience with cluster B and narcissistic people, I'm going to have to say that I think Dr. Ramani's performance in that video is a little bit on the radar screen, not too far from what it's actually like when you're actually dealing with a real narcissistic person. Okay. I don't know if Dr. Ramani has a narcissistic, specifically personality disorder, but her behavior and the way she's so grandiose about her injuries from narcissistic people, you know, the inscription on the monument, my life is a damn living monument. I mean, there is something a little bit grandiose, and she's sort of like the champion of being injured, you know, with such a resentment that's clearly clouding her objectivity. That actually looks like behavior you would see from somebody with a cluster B disorder. And even I know, okay, I'm not a psychologist, but even I know after my own experiences in therapy and just common sense that there is something suspicious about being too resentful, even if you have been abused by narcissistic people. In other words, here's the thing, you know, obviously, if I've been abused by narcissistic people, I want to be aware of it, okay? And I want to process it, okay? But if I'm still holding on to resentment, okay, and then at the same time, I'm trying to be an authority talking about this subject, that seems to me almost at the level of a conflict of interest. But what's most important to me as a person who's trying to like really assess the credibility of Dr. Ramani, okay, as a person who myself have had a cluster B diagnosis, and I've lived in a family, and I guess I could say I've been victimized by cluster B people, and I've had relationships with narcissistic people, and I believe I have been hurt by them. Okay, so I'll admit that. But in assessing Dr. Ramani's credibility, I want to circle back. I want to circle back to her comments about what it means to be heavy-handed with the forgiveness. And in a way, what does it mean when she says we need to avoid, in so many words, being too easy on narcissists? Okay, so what does that mean?
But the person said that by me commenting on the rigidity of these relationships and the lack of change that we observe in narcissism, or at least that I observe in narcissism, and most of you do too, that I am not giving the narcissistic people a chance. Then the person proceeded to say about 15 terrible, unempathic things to me. I know it was 15 because I wrote them down as it was happening. The irony wasn't lost on me.
So what irony is she talking about when she says the irony was not lost on me? You know, to be honest, I'm actually surprised she actually published this video, because this looks kind of not very healthy. Okay. But what irony is she talking about? Okay. Is she talking about the irony that she couldn't be empathic as she was listening to some friend of hers tell her something, give her some feedback, which actually didn't even sound that severe? That just sounded like ordinary conversation between two, let's say, mental health professionals. So I don't even see that she was really given any like major criticism. Okay. But she responds to it almost in a paranoid way. I mean, what, she's writing a list of things as they're in the conversation. Like that's her disengaging from her supposed empathy, if she's such a super healthy example of a non-narcissistic person. So I don't really know what irony is lost on her, because the irony I see is that she's acting kind of paranoid. I would say paranoid more than narcissistic, but she has that super sensitivity to what isn't even really that much of a criticism. It's just a topic of conversation. And even I could even answer for that criticism, because let's say if I'm talking to a person, let's say I'm having an intellectual conversation with somebody, right? And let's say that I'm being a little hard on narcissists, because even I actually believe I have been diagnosed with NPD, and even I think that NPD is almost impossible to change, if not, practically impossible. So even I kind of share some of Dr. Ramani's beliefs, to a point. I mean, maybe I don't have the attitude she has, but I do share some of her concerns about how difficult it is to let's say treat NPD, right? So if somebody criticized me for that, I don't think I would take such offense to it. I would just say, okay, I see your point, but let me try and explain how I feel about it. And then if they said, yeah, but I think you're being too harsh and I think maybe you have some resentment, I'd say, well, do you think so? Maybe I do. I mean, maybe that is part of it. I'll think about it. And then there's the obvious response she could have had. And I can't believe she didn't think of this. I can't believe it. She could have just said, hey, friend, I think you're misunderstanding. My channel is for people who are victims. Okay. I'm in the victim community. Okay. So in our community, we do openly share kind of our frustration with narcissists. And as a matter of policy, I think it's good to tell victims and to have them believe that not to have any hope in people changing if they have narcissism, right? Because I think that's a good policy for people who get victimized by narcissism. So because I'm coming from an angle of the victim community, I think it's a good policy not to bank on or to expect narcissists to change, because I think that's healthy message for victims. Okay. And so I think you're taking me out of context. I think outside the victim community, I might have a different position, but this is a message for the victim community. I mean, she could have said that, right? So I didn't see the major criticism for her to be responding in such an extreme. And again, what is a typical, I'm sorry, it's actually one of the cliches about narcissists is that they're super sensitive to criticism, even perceiving criticism where it's not even really that much of a criticism. And this is what we see here. And so she talks about the irony. I mean, I wonder about her reality testing. She doesn't seem very objective. And I don't even think she sees the irony of herself acting kind of narcissistic in response to what is really not much of a criticism.
Mercifully, I was on the phone, so I was sort of able to ruefully chuckle and roll my eyes without the person seeing me, which would have resulted in 30 more minutes of rage if they did. I actually did not follow my own Dr. Romany rules, and I did the opposite of deep. I defended, I explained, and I engaged.
Okay, so here she is admitting that she sort of lost control. Okay, so give her credit. Okay, credit where it's due. She's admitting she lost control, but she's also admitting that she rolled her eyes, and she's just being sarcastic. She's not really receptive. She's not listening. And I'm sorry, that is a narcissistic. That's a narcissistic characteristic, not being receptive to what other people are offering, dismissing. And she was dismissive. Okay, and I don't think the criticism was that big of a deal.
But I will give myself some props for not personalizing. I laid out statistics and other nonsense to this person. It was a total waste of my Sunday morning. And while in this case, my providing evidence actually did shut this person down.
So she lays out statistics and other nonsense. I mean, her attitude, I'm sorry, it's not professional, and it doesn't speak well of her. I mean, I can't believe she put this video out. And what really strikes me about this is that this is a person who she admits in the video is someone who is part of her life. Okay, I don't know if it's a friend, I don't know if it's an acquaintance, but she talks about shutting them down. I shut this person down. Okay, and again, now here's the thing. Okay, here's a person who is in the mental health community who offers herself and holds herself out as a leader in mental health and is pointing out, let's say, the toxicity of personality disorders. Okay, so in that context, she's not a regular internet person. She's not a regular YouTuber. Okay, she holds herself out to a much higher standard, and she actually holds herself out to be watching out for cluster B behaviors. Okay, but it's exactly that, the idea of shutting a person down. She's depersonalizing that person. Okay, she's rendering them just an object, like an insect, to be shut down. She has objectified that person and has dehumanized them. Okay, and that to me is an empathy deficit. All right, now I don't know that she has a chronic empathy deficit, but she had a situational empathy deficit that was caused by her perceiving herself to be criticized. But this whole thing, of just like, oh, it was just a waste of my time, and she gives herself props for not taking it personally. I mean, I'm sorry, she doesn't know. I mean, she doesn't see in herself. She took it very personally. But let's see how she takes this whole incident and she turns it into a reinforcement of her, let's say, I'm going to say it, almost like a bigoted attitude, like a bigotry towards, let's say, the category of people who have narcissistic issues or narcissistic personality disorder.
The conversation really made me reflect on this sort of moralistic empathy that this person had for all of the narcissistic people out there. The absence of empathy this person had for me, a person to whom they're very close to.
Okay, at this point, I don't think what she's saying is credible. Okay, I don't think it's credible. Okay, I don't think it's credible to take that somebody offers that kind of criticism, which I think is a very mild criticism, and interprets that as not having any empathy for her. Okay, I don't think that's fair. I don't think there's any indication from what we've heard that the person criticizing her actually doesn't have empathy for her. Okay, I don't think that's fair. However, I think we can see that Dr. Ramani objectified that person, depersonalized them, dehumanized them, and trivialize them and minimize them. And I think what the evidence that we can see, now we don't really know what happened in that conversation, but from the evidence we have of that conversation, from what she's offering, she's only basically showing us the empathy that she did not have for that person.
After the conversation, I felt invalidated, tired, wrung out. And as most survivors of narcissistic abuse do, I fell into that thinking of, what if this person's right? What if I am some kind of monster for pointing out these patterns and not being nicer to narcissistic people? Maybe I should be an enabler.
And so finally, we can see what for Dr. Ramani would mean going too far and enabling a narcissist. And basically, it sounds like what would be enabling for her is just being a little bit patient, a little bit open-minded, or maybe a little not so bigoted or not so harsh on narcissistic people. But to be fair to Dr. Ramani, okay, I will say this, okay, I have been diagnosed with NPD, okay, and I have been around people who have had NPD and other cluster B disorders, okay, and I've been around people who have had very difficult addictions, okay, and with the recent death of Matthew Perry, okay, and the things we're learning about Matthew Perry now, I think we know that anybody who is in the realm of addictions or cluster B, narcissism, antisocial, borderline, I think the prognosis as a matter of policy, I think has to be kind of pessimistic. All right. And so in that sense, I do actually kind of sympathize with Dr. Ramani in the sense that we shouldn't entertain false hope. Okay. And I think if there is going to be, let's say, a modality of therapy that does really work with narcissists in the future, something that I don't think exists right now, but if there ever does appear in psychology like a more effective way of treating narcissism or borderline or addictions or antisocial, whatever, okay, I think we ought to also keep ourselves open to the possibility that maybe the idea of improvement should not involve trying to change the personality, okay? Because like Dr. Ramani, I don't really know that personalities are all that changeable. I think where instead of psychology focusing on trying to change personalities or improve personalities, maybe we ought to try a different philosophy where we accept the personalities as they are, but maybe we try to open something additional in the human person beyond the personality so that we can sort of learn to live with difficult personalities. And to me, that would be a little more spiritual, that would mean us accepting that there's more to me than just my personality, and that I can sort of fully accept my personality without having to change it. And yet at the same time, I can somehow gain more control over that personality because I accept it. Okay, instead of trying to fight it. So this is just the first in a series. Okay, I think because Dr. Ramani is such a high profile, such a famous influencer in the area of narcissism and cluster B disorders. Okay, I'm going to have to do a few, or at least I feel like I need to do, or I want to do, I want to do a few episodes on this. And so this is just the first one, but in closing, to sort of conclude and summarize this one, okay, what I do see with Dr. Ramani is that I do kind of agree with her in the sense that I also don't think that we should try to hope to really change people's personalities that much. And so in the abuse communities, okay, in the community of people who have been victims, okay, I do think it's a good policy not to hold out a lot of hope that anybody could ever change their personality. So in that sense, I have to say that I kind of agree with Dr. Ramani. But where I do not, what I do not share with Dr. Ramani is that it's healthy to be holding yourself out as an expert on personality disorders or on the best policy of how to deal with personality disorders if we are personally, let's say, very resentful about those disorders. Okay. And I think that she is admitting that she's a victim, okay, which is fine. And I feel bad for her that she's a victim, but she hasn't really gotten over the resentment that she has. And I think that's a conflict of interest. And I think that without that conflict of interest, just like if you were, let's say, a biologist working on, let's say, rattlesnakes or sharks or whatever, and if, let's say, you ended up with your hand amputated because of an injury, and that changed your whole attitude about conservation. Okay. Likewise, I think Dr. Ramani may have I think her resentment may be clouding her let's say, her open-mindedness about maybe other ways that we could deal with these disorders, and maybe not be so pessimistic if maybe we didn't focus so much on trying to change the personality. Okay. And so I'm just going to leave it there for now. And I will produce more videos where I go into a little more depth as to, maybe some ideas that I have about personality disorders, and also maybe more ideas I have about maybe what I feel are some of the limitations in the point of view that Dr. Ramani is bringing, okay, which I do think is informed by her own resentment. Anyway, I appreciate your patience, and I'll have more to say. And by the way, I don't think everything about her is bad. I'm just saying my main problem with Dr. Ramani is I'm concerned about a conflict of interest, and that she is not maybe more open and honest and doesn't appreciate enough her own resentments toward this category of people that have mental issues. Anyway, I appreciate your patience, and thanks for watching.